In this video, we are going to learn about React lifecycle methods. So, what are lifecycle methods? Lifecycle methods are sort of handlers around various lifecycle events, which means that something in lifecycle happens, and then there is a particular method which is called at that point of time, and then you can do whatever in that function. So, uh, some of the common lifecycle events can be something called mounting and unmounting. Now, what is mounting and unmounting? So let's say there is a component, and then that component is rendered in the DOM, which means that, like, right now, let's say this we are running this. So let's say we are already running this, and we can see that, yeah, this component, this is using our greetings2, which is a class component, right? So this component is rendered and inserted into the DOM. Now as soon as that is inserted, then at that point of time we call that this component has mounted. So this is called mounting event. What is unmounting? Unmounting is that, let's say, after some time you remove this from the DOM, then what happens? That component is gone from the DOM. So the moment it is removed from the DOM, that moment, that event can be called as unmounting. So essentially, mounting is a component rendered into the DOM for the first time, and unmounting is the component being removed from the DOM. Okay. So yeah, right now I'm just commenting it, but you can understand, we can just do it, let's say, on a button click also. That, let's say, I click a button and that it unmounts. I click the button again and then it mounts. So let me just show you how to do that. So let's say there is some variable, let's say some flag which is used for mounting and unmounting. Flag and set flag, these are the variables. The flag is the variable and set flag is for setting that. So we can do use state, and in that, let's say, initially it is mounted, which is true. When the variable is true, then this component will be mounted, and when the variable is false, then this component will be not mounted, which means that now I have to do something like this, that if this thing, let me see. So if this thing is true, then only render this. Okay, if this thing is true, then only render this. So obviously right now it will be rendered, and if it is false, then it will be not rendered. Okay, but then again we want to do it using, let's say, on a click of a button. So for example, let's say I have a button tag, a button element, and that button element, when I click on that, then essentially, let's say, I change that flag. So that flag, let's say I do set flag, right? And what happens is that whatever the current value is there, let's say I toggle that value. So what will be the current value? The current value will be, let's say, initially true. Now if I click, then that will become false. Again, if I click this, then that false thing is going to be again true. So I'm just using the function way of doing that. So whatever is the current thing, you just toggle that. So right now you can see that this component is rendered. So this component means greeting component is rendered because flag value is true. As soon as I click this, then this has become the value of flag has become false, because this thing is called, right? And then since it is false, that's why that is unmounted. Okay, that is removed from the DOM, so that is called unmounted. And when I click again, then it is mounted again. So this is what I call mounting and unmounting. So now you have a fair idea about mounting and unmounting. Let's say that you want to do something. You want to do something when the component has mounted, and then again you want to do something when the component has unmounted. Okay, so let's start with class component. So right now we are using class components. In class component, there is a method for this mounting event. So that lifecycle method is called component did mount. Okay, which means that in this function you can pretty much write anything which you want to do while the component is being mounted. Okay, so let's say simply I print here, nothing I do, I just print here that, yeah, the component has just mounted. Okay, so let me show you. Now you can see that two times it is being written, and do two times why? Because we are right now in dev mode. If you run in prod mode, then it will be just one time it will be mounted. But we know that in dev mode the component is in React 18 onwards, the component is mounted twice. But there is another lifecycle method which is for detecting the event unmounting, which means that that lifecycle method will be run when the component is unmounting, and for that the thing is component will unmount. So this function will run when the component is unmounting. Okay, and now you can clearly see that what is happening. Component did mount, component will unmount, and then component did mount, which means that the component, this component, initially it mounted, then quickly it unmounted and then mounted again. Okay, so that is what it is happening. And right now it is mounted. Now if you click, then what is going to happen? This component is going to be unmount. So if you click, then you will see that unmount is called, right? And similarly, if you click, then again it is mounted, and then if you click again, then it is unmounted, right? So that is what it is happening. So and again that mounting and unmounting can happen because of several reasons, right? So for example, from here, let's say you change any state variable. So for that matter, and let's say you are having two variables, and then any of them you change, let's say both of them one after another you change, then for everything it should re-render. Okay, now the point is that you have to create your component in such a way that multiple renders should not be a problem. So you have to handle your these lifecycle methods in such a way that even if it is rendering unmounting and mounting multiple times, and that should not be an issue, right? So let's say you set some event handler, which means that I set something as soon as the component mounts. Okay, then you have to assume that it might happen that component can unmount and then again mount, right? So you have to configure those things in unmount, will unmount, which means that yeah, if component gets removed from the DOM, then I have to do something, some sort of cleanup or something, and then again if it mounts, then again I will set up those handlers or something. That those examples we will take soon. But right now, this is the way in which you can do the thing in class-based components. So we got it right. Now let's try to do the same thing in functional components. Okay, so let's change this to function component, and now you can see that yeah, right now obviously this sort of thing is there, but I have not written anything how to do that that print that mounting and unmounting thing in functional components. So in functional component, the way to simulate this sort of thing, that this sort of lifecycle methods are not available because this is not a class component. So there is another way using hooks. Okay, and for that the hook which we are going to use is called use effect hook. Now all the hooks, the names start with use something, right? So let's use that use effect. Now that will be imported from React. Okay, now what you have to do is that in this, firstly you have to pass a callback function, and then you have to pass an empty array. Now what is this empty array? This empty array, which is the second argument, is called dependency array, right? And in dependency array right now you should just pass empty array, which means that it does not depend on anything. If you pass an empty array, then this function, the first argument, will be called as soon as the component is mounted. So if you want to prove that, then simply write, let's say, mounted. Okay, and then when you run it, then you'll see that it is mounted. Okay, and again it will be rendered two times, that's why it is mounted twice. But definitely if there is something like mounting, then there has to be some way in which we can detect that when this component is being unmounted, like here. So the first one we simulated, right, using this way, right? How to simulate the second one? That as soon as the component is just going to be unmounted, how can we say that if we want to run something, right? For that, the scenario is that inside use effect only, what you have to do is that you have to return, it is optional, you might not return, but if you return this function, any function, then this function React guarantees that it will call this function as soon as the component is being unmounted. Okay, which means that now if I write here unmounting, okay, so as soon as the component is going to be unmounted, just before that it is going to be called. So now this thing is sort of a simulation for this thing. Okay, and you can verify that by saving, and then you can see that component is mounted and quickly unmounted and mounted again. Okay, so this is what we were talking about. Now same thing, if we click, then this thing is going to be unmounted, then again unmounting will be called. You can see unmounting is being called, right? And again if I click, then again it is going to be mounted. So again here also you have to take care that if you want to do some cleanup or something, then that you are going to do here. And then if you want to run something once, as soon as this thing is being, whole thing is being inserted, this component is being inserted into the DOM, as soon as it is being rendered for the first time, then whatever you want to do, that you will do in the body of this function use effect. Okay, so and again for this time, for the time being, just think that this has to be empty array for now, right? You don't pass anything. So if you pass empty array, then it will be called just once, when first time the component is being rendered. Okay, now let's try doing something as soon as the component is being mounted. So let's start with class components. So with this class component, what we want to do is that as soon as the component is being mounted, I want to do something. Okay, so for that let's comment the will unmount for now. Let's just focus on this mounting thing. Okay, so let's say there is a constructor, and we are creating a constructor because we want to, let's say, create some state. So for that, firstly we have to call super with props, right? And then we can initialize our state. This dot state is equal to, and let's say some state variable foo is there and its value is 5. Okay, and then let's say we simply want to print this. So this dot state dot foo. Okay, so essentially we can see that this 5 is being printed. But as soon as the component is being mounted, what I want to do, I want to, let's say, change this 5 to 10. So what I can do, I can do something called this dot set state, we already know, and then inside that we can change this foo value to 10. Now if you see that now as soon as the component is mounted quickly, so it is not visible, but even if you refresh, it is not visible, but quickly, very quickly, actually first time it was 5, but as soon as it mounted quickly, that thing became 10, and eventually the final value is 10. If you want to see, then you can print here the value. You can print here the value that this dot state dot foo, this is what it is being printed, right? Let's see its value. So you'll see quickly that initially it was 5 and quickly it became 10. Okay, so yeah, so this thing is happening now. What we want to do is that how can we do so this thing is like just one time it is happening, right? If we want to do the same thing in, let's say, functional component, then what we can do again, let's say we are creating a foo and then set foo, right? And we are going to use state, and in that the initial value we used 5, right? We are going to use start with 5, and then we can use this foo inside our thing. And again let's comment the logs for now, but right now you can see that yeah, it is going to be 5 if we use function component. So it is 5, right? Now as soon as the component is mounted, I want to change it to 10. Okay, so what I can do, I can simply call set foo with 10. Okay, and now you can clearly see that this is 10. Okay, and for that matter, if you simply print your foo, then you'll see that initially it was 5 and very quickly it becomes 10. Okay, so this is the same thing what we did just now in class based components. Now whatever we are trying to do here, let's do the same thing, but let's do it after some time, which means that, yeah, I want to make it 5 to 10, but right now it is immediately being happening, right? Let's say what we want to do is that we want to change this after some time, which means that this set state should not happen immediately, rather it should happen after some time. For that I can use set timeout, right? And let's say after 1500 milliseconds, 1.5 seconds, I want to do this. Okay, so now you can see that right now it is 5, and after 1.5 seconds this is becoming 10. Okay, and again we can do the same thing here. So instead of calling this immediately, we can do set timeout. Okay, and then we can do the same thing after 1500 milliseconds. Okay, so after 1.5 seconds you can see that it is becoming 10. Sorry, I believe that we are still using class based components, so let's get back to functional component. And now we are using functional component, and still we can see that after 1.5 second it gets to 10. Yeah, so that should be fine. But now let's do one thing, that instead of doing 5 to 10, let's increment the value. So let's say it is 0, and then I want to do 1, but not hard code to 1. So let's increment the value of foo to foo by 1, which means that I do something like foo plus 1. Okay, I know that now you can see that yeah, this will work fine. I'm using class based component still, that is fine. So this is working fine, but there is a problem, right? You can see that here it is saying that the dependency foo should be there. So what happens, that whatever variables from outside you use, if inside use effect, if you use any variable from outside, then it says that you should add this in the dependency array. So the idea of dependency array is that this function also called, this is also called effect, this effect or this function runs whenever any value inside the dependency array changes. Okay, so whenever this value changes, this will run again. Now and if this is empty array, then what is going to happen, that this will never change, which means that this will never be rerun again. First time it will be run when the component is mounted, and after that it will never run. So if you want it to never run, which means that you are trying to simulate the behavior of component did mount, then you don't pass here anything. That is the idea, right? But now it is saying that you should pass foo, because you are using foo from outside, right? So yeah, you can leave it as it is also, but there is one small fix of that, is that rather than using this foo plus 1, in fact we know that there should be a better way, right? If we use this thing, which is like foo arrow foo plus 1, then now this foo is not this foo, rather this foo is the current value of foo, whatever is the current value of foo, and then you are incrementing that. And now this warning also goes away, because now I'm not using this foo directly inside it, right? And if you use this variable set for this setter, if you use, then this warning does not come, right? So that is fine, which means that now whenever this thing will be called, then automatically it will be called with the most recent value of foo. Okay, so that is fine. Now you see that this is 0, and after yeah, but now another problem has come, right? Now it is not becoming 1, rather it is becoming 2. You see, I refresh, it is loaded. After 1.5 second, it is not becoming 1, it is becoming 2. In fact, it is becoming 1, but quickly it is becoming 2. Why is that happening? Let's analyze that. But before that, let's see the same thing is happening here also or not. Okay, so here what we want to do, that we have to start with 0, and then we have to set after 1.5 second value to this dot state dot foo dot 1, sorry, plus 1. Okay, and again this is wrong way, but let's firstly do the wrong way, and then we'll get back to the right way. Okay, so this thing, you see, then after 1.5 second it becomes 1, right? But again we know that a better way would be to use the current value of foo, rather than the captured the value which is global value, which is right now here, because we know that if we want to, if our next value depends on the previous value, then it's better to use the function, pass the function, rather than doing this, right? So our approach should be state and like this, and then now you can use directly state.foo rather than this thing. And now we are using this component, class component, that is fine. But now if you see, then you can see that again the same thing is happening here also, which means that after 1.5 second it is becoming 2. Okay, and here also if you print the value of this dot state.foo, then you will clearly see that 0, and then after 1.5 second directly it becomes 2, means 1, it becomes 1, and quickly it becomes 2. Okay, so sometimes yeah, so you can see that basically final value is coming 2 somehow. Okay, so what is happening is the double mount problem, right? We know that now we are mounting it 2 times. That is the problem. If we are mounting it 2 times, then what is happening? Then first time this set timeout is called, and then again you remount it, then again set timeout is called, and then what is happening is that so let's see one thing, that yeah, definitely this is mounted twice, right? So let's log b here, which means that yeah, b will be called twice, right? So let's comment this for now, and let's see this thing. Yeah, so b is called twice, right? Let's print it something here. Okay, so yeah, so what is happening is that this internal value, which is this thing, so somehow this is scheduled, and what is happening is that next time when you are calling it again, then this thing is not being cleaned up. What is the meaning of cleanup? You set a timer, and then you don't clean it up. Clean it up means there is something called clear timeout, if you remember, right? I did not do that, and the next mount I again did set timeout. So basically now it is called twice, right? So somehow these problems can arise because of that, right? And because of that only you can see that it is becoming 2. In order to fix that, what we can do is that we can as soon as and I know that as soon as it will be unmounted, this thing will be called. Okay, you can see that as soon as this will become 2, then before so first time only this component will unmount is called, which means that as soon as the class component is mounted, one time it is mounted, then again it unmount, and then again it mount, right? So why not clean up this, whatever earlier set timeout we did, we clean up this whenever the component is going away, so that there is no such hanging timeout which we don't want. That should not be. How we can do that? We can do that something by doing something like this, that let's we know that this set timeout returns sort of a id, right? So let's call it timer id, and what we are going to do is that this timer id we can use while we are going while we are unmounting, and we can clear timeout with this timer id. And why we are using this dot thing rather than, so this thing is not part of the data flow, right? You are just you just want some place to store this value, whatever is returned from set timeout, so that you can use it later, right? But it's not that component has to be remounted or something based on timer id change or something, right? This is not part of the data flow. That's why it does not be part of a state or something, right? Which means that this can be directly attached to the class, right? And we know that we can attach new class fields directly by assigning any variable like this dot time, any name you can pick, right? And that value you store here, and you reuse here, right? Now what is happening is that when it is mounting and then again unmounting, as soon as it is unmounting, the first timeout is gone. Timeout is gone means timeout is unscheduled, which means that now it will not run, and the second timeout will only be get scheduled, which means that now 0 to 2 that problem was happening, that problem you can see that now it is not happening, right? And that's why it is React chose to render it twice in development mode, so that you can find these bugs and you can fix that, right? And this also gives us a good example that what is the purpose of will unmount. So the purpose of will unmount, you can clearly see that the purpose of will unmount is that these sort of things, this sort of cleanup or something, which we want to do, that sort of cleanup we can do inside here. Okay, now how we can do the same thing here? Here also the same problem was happening, right? If we go to the functional component, then the same problem was happening here also, that from 0 it became 2. I don't want that, right? And that is also here also the same thing is happening, is that set timeout is running twice, right? What we can do is that again here we can have some variable, let's say timer id. I can take this variable, and then again here what is happening, that while unmounting this function will be called, right? This function will be called. At when this function is called, then here I do the clear timeout with the variable which is above. Okay, so the same thing. This is gets scheduled as soon as this component gets mounted. Before unmounting, this thing is running. When this thing is running, then that timeout is unscheduled, and when the next time it is mounting, then this thing is scheduled, right? Which means that now it should not run 0 to 2, rather it should go from 0 to 1. Okay, so this is what we wanted, right? So now it is working fine. However, now that set timeout is working, let's see that if the same thing can work out for set interval also. So we know that instead of set timeout, set interval is also there, right? Now set interval, and instead of clear timeout we will have clear interval. Okay, so right now we are using a functional component, so let's try to do that here. So right now it is 0 and it is becoming 1, 2, 3. So it is fine, right? It is working fine. Now so this is working fine. Can we do the same thing here? Again, set timeout, instead of set timeout let's do set interval, and instead of clear timeout let's do clear interval. Okay, and now instead of class component let's use instead of a functional component let's use class component, and now you can see that it is working fine, right? So the idea is that this thing is working fine. However, let's try to do one thing. Here, while we are using class component, just for the sake of it, let's try to convert this into non-functional case, which means that rather than using the functional way, let's simply pass the object, and let's for that matter just take this thing. Let's just simply see that whether it is working or not. So you can see that it is still working. And why it is still working? Because yeah, even if you are not using that functional case, what is happening is that there is no race condition. There are not too many set timeouts going here and there, right? So just after 1.5 seconds, just one set timeout. So there is no race condition, and that's why there is not much problem here. We can go ahead with this also, right? But let's try to do the same thing here, which means that in functional component, instead of this, we know that this thing is right now working, right? So 0, 1, 2, this thing is working, right? Now instead of this, let's try to use this way, right? If you see, then what is happening, that after 0, 0 becomes 1, and after that it remains 1. You can see that it is not changing after 1. Okay, so what is happening? What is the problem? The problem is that here and this is specifically for functional components. In functional components, any value, any variable which you are using inside any callback or something, that value is captured. Initially, right? Which means that actually when the first time you are doing this thing, okay, and let's print this thing. So let's say log, and let's say anything. Let's simply put an arrow, right? So you can see that that thing is being called every time, but what the problem is that this timeout this interval, set interval, right? That interval thing is being called every 1.5 second, but this value is not changing. This value is not changing because this foo is still 0. This is not changing, and that is a particular thing, and that might be cause of many times bugs inside functional components, is that you have to remember this thing, that inside functional components the value which you are using like this, that value is captured, which means that if when you did set interval, then that time when this function, right, this function got scheduled, which is the first argument, then the foo value initially it was 0 and it remained 0. When you are changing, let's say you are changing this foo to 1 or 2, right? So that thing is not being captured here. The first time whatever is captured, that thing remains as it is. And that's why if the foo is 0, then no matter how many times it keeps on running, you can see, if you print foo here, then you'll see that foo remains 0, and every time you are using, you're definitely, this is being called every 1.5 seconds, but 0, this, since foo remains 0, so foo plus 1 is 1. Again, next time when it is called, then again, since foo is remaining 0 only, so 0 plus 1, 0 plus 1, 0 plus 1, that you are setting every time. And that's why this keeps on remaining 1 only. And that's why you can see that every time this is being called, no matter how many times it is being called, this thing is remaining foo only. Now this might be confusing, right? That you might be thinking that, yeah, I'm changing foo here, right? Then why this thing is still the same? That is how it is, right? In functional components, when you schedule something, or when you have a callback or that sort of something, whatever the variable which you are using inside, that thing is captured, and whatever is the initial value of that thing is only remaining. That thing is only the captured value is the only value which is visible inside that, no matter when you call it. Okay, so that's why it is happening, and that's why the only thing here to solve it is this thing. Okay, so now you remove this. Okay, so in this way you can see that 0 is becoming 1, 1 is becoming 2, 2 is becoming 3, right? So now it is working fine. So in class component, like, it is more intuitive, like it is working always, but in functional components you have to take care of that thing, that this form will not work. You have to use the above form only. Okay, so that is fine. Now let me show you one thing, that yeah, every time this functional component is being rendered, then let's comment it for now. Then you can see that yeah, this 0 is becoming 1, 1 is becoming 2, 2 is becoming 3. That is fine. But let's see, let's inspect this. Okay, let's inspect this, and you will see that React is only updating what's necessary, which means that every time this thing is changing, but React is not rewriting the whole DOM. It is just rewriting whatever is necessary, and this thing is automatically taken care by React, right? So the idea is that this is basically part of that virtual DOM, and this diffing the DOM, and then checking that what is necessary, and then re-rendering only that part of it. That is internal thing done by React. But from your point of view, you have to just remember that React does its performance, gets its performance by optimizing in this way, that it only updates whatever is necessary. And that's why even if like too many variables, too many states are there, still React will be fast, because it is able to decipher that exactly what are the places where I need to change. Okay, other places it does not do change. So that in that fashion it is going to be optimizing and running our code fast. Okay, so that is one thing, right? Next thing, let's understand this part, that while we are doing something like this, this is, yeah, this set interval and clear interval, this is fine. But mainly the purpose of this sort of component did mount is, one of the main use cases is that as soon as the component is loaded, let's say you have to load some data from the server. Okay, so that data is not already part of the component, but that data is, let's say, needed to show to the user. Okay, but that data is only fetched when the component is mounted. That is your use case, right? So what you can do is that let's say you go to JSON placeholder, and you fetch one of the dummy APIs. So let's take this one only. Okay, what is this? this thing will return a plain and simple some JSON. It is going to be returned simply this object, it is going to return that, right? Now my requirement is that as soon as the component is mounted, then show this on page, on web page. That is, let's say, my requirement, simple requirement, right? Now what you have to do is that let's firstly go back to class based components, and then my requirement is that for now there is, let's say, no requirement of component will unmount, but inside component did mount, what I have to do is that I have to fetch this. So how to fetch this? Using fetch API we can do that, right? So const resp is equal to await, and then I can use fetch API this thing, right? Now you can see that this is giving error, right? Because we are using await and this function is not async function, right? Turns out that so one way is what? One way is that, yeah, I will not use await, rather I will do a promise like dot then, and then I will get resp here, and then I will print that. That is one way, right? And it will work fine, right? However, you can see that this response is coming fine. However, I don't want, I know that let's say I'm better comfortable in async await syntax. So how to use async await? Okay, so that's what I was saying, that let's say I want to use my async await syntax. This syntax is not working because this thing is not an async function, right? Now you can convert this function into async function by just writing async keyword in front of it. Okay, and yeah, so it works here, it does not work everywhere. So for example, you cannot make constructor async, you cannot make render async or something like that, right? So other than that, almost all the lifecycle methods you can make it async, but the point is here that you have to put this async keyword, otherwise you cannot do. Now that warning is gone. Now simply you have to use this resp, which means that, let's say, I don't know, this item is equal to await resp dot JSON. We know that the data which is coming is JSON, right? And for the time being, let's simply print that thing. And now we'll see that as soon as the component is mounted, I get the data. Okay, but my requirement is that let's say I have to print this data. I have to print this data. Okay, so I have to print this data, then definitely I should be able to and whenever, as soon as I get this data and set this data, then automatically my UI should re-render, which means that my UI should get that data. In order to do so, definitely it should be some state variable, which means that this data should be put into some state variable, because state variable, if we use state variable, then only internally from here whatever I change, then UI will re-render automatically in that case only, right? If I use just one if I simply use like just like this dot let's say user, or let's say task something, right? And if I simply set into that, so I do something like this dot task, right, is equal to item or something, I can do that. But then yeah, what it will do, it is and even if I use this dot task here, this is not going to re-render, because React is not designed to even if by now component has mounted, it has fetched, React is not designed to re-render when some field is changing, right? React is designed that you have to change some state. Okay, so rather than that, let's write something like this task, right? And then initially that task is, let's say, null. Okay, and what I will do is that I will change set state, and I will set that item to the task. Okay, so what is happening is that now earlier my task was null. As soon as the component is mounted, this data is fetched and set inside the task. So task state. So task state was initially null. Now it has this data which is fetched. Now what I have to do is that yeah, so if you want to just print here this dot state dot task, then you will see that initially it will be null, and next time it will be as soon as this request is done, then I can see that will be a proper data which is fetched from here, and you can verify that here. Yeah, you can see that initially it was null, and now that data which was here, that data is now available here. Okay, so that is fine, but I don't want to print it console. I want to print in UI, right? So what I can do is that I can print, let's say, this dot state dot task. Okay, let's try doing that. If I see, then you see that there is some sort of error coming, right? Okay, what is that error? This is saying that so let's firstly comment this thing. So this is saying that objects are not valid React child. So turns out that inside JSX you cannot write directly objects like this. Okay, see, you can write any primitive value. So you can write 5, 10, 23, anything, and those sort of things will render. You can write hello world or anything, and any sort of thing which is a primitive type, right? So those sort of things will work. But if you try to add print some, let's say, have some objects. So let's say this is some object, like this thing will give you an error. So this is not allowed. Objects are not allowed like this, right? So you can have arrays, that is fine, but then those arrays should be having something, right? So let's say this is having, let's say, 10, 20, or let's say these are having some JSX elements on their own, then they can be rendered, that is fine. But directly objects, but this thing which I was writing here, this thing is an object, right? So it cannot be directly rendered like this. However, we know, so right now let's comment this and let's uncomment this. So we know that, yeah, this thing is null and then this thing is coming like this. So this is native object. What if I convert this native? My purpose is essentially just to show this on the UI, right? So why not I convert this into a string, right? So for the purposes of showing, I can simply convert it to string, and that should work fine, right? So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to simply convert it into string. And how to convert an object into string? We know that you can do it using json.stringify and like this, right? And you can see that, yeah, this is fine, but we know that you can prettify it, beautify it using null too. So some indentation sort of thing can be given, right? And right now, even if there is indentation actually inside here, that thing will be indented, but it is not visible here because this is pure HTML. So you have to use some tags which supports it. So pre-tag you can use, and inside that, if you write like this, then you will see that this is properly indented. Okay, so it is fine. So you can, if you refresh, then you will see that for some time, if you closely see, for some time it will be null, and very quickly it becomes this object. Sometime it is null, and then very quickly it becomes this thing. And that small delay, that is the time in which this request is going on. So initially it rendered with null, right? And so you can see here, initially it rendered with null. That's why initially for some time that null thing was coming, and as soon as I got the data, then I'm showing this data in this UI form on the React UI. Okay, now we have done this thing in class based component, but let's try to do the same thing in a functional component. So let's change it to functional component, and inside functional component now let's remove this whole thing, right? And what we want to do now is that we want to have something like this task, and then we want to have this thing. Okay, so let's change it to, let's set some task is there, and I'm going to set task, and it will start with null. That is what we are doing in class based component, right? And now we can print it in a similar manner here also. So in here I can print something like this, and now it will be simply plain task variable which is available here. But right now obviously it will be null, so like nothing is printed, that is fine, just null is printed. But right now, as soon as the component is mounted, as soon as the functional component is mounted, I have to fetch data and then change this variable, change this task variable. That is what I want to do, right? So essentially I want to do this, and what is the best place to do this? Obviously I have to do it inside use effect. Okay, so right now there is no we are not doing any like anything on unmounting or something, so there is nothing to no need to return something here. But you can see the problem. First of all, this thing await is not working, that is fine. Secondly, even if everything works fine, then also this dot set state is not the way to do in class based component, right? So essentially we have to do set task, we have to do set task, and inside set task, whatever the item is there, that object we've got, we have to set it in task. So this is what we essentially want to do, but still this is not working because await is we cannot use without async function. Now what is the function inside which we are using? Which we are using is essentially the first argument of use effect, this function. This function must be async. Let's try to change this to async. So async. Now we get some other warning. So it is saying that effect callbacks are synchronous to prevent race condition, which means that effect callbacks cannot be async. Okay, so this is problematic, right? We need this to be inside some async function, and at the same time it is saying that if whatever the use effect callback is there, that cannot be async. So how to do that? Okay, now what we can do, that we can create an IIFE, which means that the whole thing, what I can do is that I can create my own function and call it immediately, and the whole function, this function, now I can make this function async. So what did I do? In the directly this callback, async was not allowed, so I created my own function, separate function, and you can name it also and then call it again. But why to name it? Because the whole purpose is just to create and call it immediately. So an IIFE, immediately invoked function expression, is sufficient. So this is how it works, and now I have created it and called it, and now this function can be made async, and that's why await is fine inside it, right? So now if you see, then you can see that it is working fine. And if you change this and print the task, then you will see that it was null, and very quickly, as soon as the request from JSON placeholder, this URL is finished, then we got the object, and that object is printed here, right? So now we have understood that how to and generally this is the most common use case of component did mount, right? That as soon as the component is mounted, you want to fetch some data, and then using that data. So right now it is a very plain and simple thing, right? But later you might get a whole list of items from the server, and the whole list, let's say you want to show it in the UI. Okay, so those sort of requirements can be definitely fulfilled using component did mount or use effect like this. Okay, so this is like one of the first videos in lifecycle methods. Later we will see some more videos in which we can learn about some more lifecycle methods available in React. But right now, use effect from the point of view of functional components and component did mount and component will unmount, these basic methods will get you started with various lifecycle method requirements in case of React. Okay, so that should be good for now. Let's see you in the next one.